Have a seat, today's tea is bitter, but still sweeter than the price the villain in this story is about to pay. May's red ledger has just turned to a new page. Are you ready to claim justice with Reddit? Revenge tales. What would you do if the man who carried you through cancer and MS became the one sitting in a dialysis chair, and you felt something in you start to pull away? If that question makes you uncomfortable, subscribe, because this isn't a tea story. It's a real step-by-step unraveling, and the smallest warning signs are the ones most women miss until it's too late. 12 years ago, Dan washed my hair over a kitchen sink after surgery. He set alarms for my meds. He handled the paperwork, the pharmacy runs, the long appointments, without ever making me feel like a burden. Then life flipped. Kidney disease, dialysis, waiting lists, bad days that followed us home. And I told myself, I'll show up the way he showed up for me. But the truth is, I didn't fall apart all at once. I changed in tiny, quiet ways first, and that's where this story begins. The story really starts in a small exam room that smelled like sanitizer and cheap hand soap. The paper gown stuck to my skin. Those harsh fluorescent lights made everything look worse. My face, my fear, the whole situation. Dan sat in the corner with a styrofoam cup of gas station coffee, quiet like he always was, not cold, just steady. The kind of man who doesn't talk big. He just shows up. When the doctor said breast cancer, I watched Dan's jaw tighten for half a second. Then he nodded like, okay, tell us what to do. I chose the double mastectomy because I wanted safety more than I wanted anything else. Survival. No guessing games. Dan pulled out his phone right there and started writing down dates, numbers, names. He called insurance before we even left the parking lot. That day, I believed we were solid, like nothing could break us. Because I believed we were solid, I let myself fall apart at home. After surgery, I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't even wash my own hair. Dan filled the sink with warm water, rolled up his sleeves, and did it like it was normal. No dramatic speeches. Just his hands, careful and practical, untangling what pain had turned into a mess. He set alarms for my meds every few hours, day and night. He changed the sheets when I soaked through them. He learned which pillows kept my chest from pulling. He kept the house running like a machine because I couldn't, but I couldn't look at myself. I changed clothes in the bathroom with the door locked. I avoided mirrors. I flinched when my own skin brushed fabric. Dan would say, "You're still, you, soft, certain." And I'd nod, because it was easier than telling him the truth. I didn't believe him yet. But life didn't pause for my insecurity. Bills still showed up. Trash still needed to go out. The world kept asking for normal, so we faked it. We went back to Target runs and Costco carts piled too high. Dan pushed the cart with one hand and held my elbow with the other when the store felt too bright and too loud. At home, he paid the bills, packed lunches, folded laundry quietly, like it was nothing worth mentioning. And that made me feel worse, because the more he carried, the more I felt like I owed him a version of me I couldn't access. I tried to be fine. I tried to be grateful in the right way. But at night, when he pulled me close, my body would go stiff before my mind caught up. I whispered, "I'm sorry." Dan kissed my forehead and said, "It's okay." But it wasn't, and we both knew it. A year or two later, the MS didn't crash into our lives. It seeped in. My fingers went numb while I was unloading groceries. My legs felt heavy halfway through the aisles. I'd wake up tired like I hadn't slept at all. It was the kind of sick that makes you question yourself first. Am I just stressed? Am I getting older? Then the tests came back, and the doctor said the words out loud. Dan didn't panic. He adjusted. He drove when I felt unsteady. He handled the phone calls, the insurance back and forth, the pharmacy runs. He started cooking more, because some days I couldn't stand long enough to finish dinner. If I tried to push through, he'd put a hand on my shoulder and say, "Rest. I got it." I hated being the one taken care of again, But I also leaned into it because it was easier, and deep down I told myself something that felt like comfort at the time. He'll always be my rock. He'll always be my rock was comforting. Until it started to feel like a cage. One morning I looked at myself and thought, I can't keep living like I'm waiting for my body to betray me. So I drove to a gym near the shopping center, the kind wedged between a nail salon and a dry cleaner, and I walked in, wearing an oversized sweatshirt like armor. I started on the treadmill because it felt safe. I kept my eyes on the numbers, not the mirrors. My hands tingled sometimes. My legs got heavy. And I'd tell myself, 5 more minutes. Then a trainer named Kara learned my name. She pulled me into a beginner class. I showed up again and again. A woman in the locker room said, "You look great." It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the patient. I wasn't the one being handled carefully. I felt alive again. Feeling alive again made me braver. And also hungrier for proof. A friend from the gym told me about a reconstruction surgeon downtown. He's amazing. Like, truly. So I booked the consult and pretended I wasn't nervous, even though my palms were sweating on the steering wheel the whole drive. Dan came with me. He sat beside me in the waiting room, quiet, scrolling on his phone, then putting it away when the nurse called my name. In the exam room, the surgeon talked options and timelines like it was just another project. I kept looking at Dan, waiting for a flinch, a comment, anything. He didn't give me judgment. He gave me steadiness. On the way back to the car, he said, simple and direct, if it helps you feel like you again, do it. Something in my chest loosened, and right there, with his hand on the steering wheel, I made myself a promise that felt clean. I'll make it up to him. I'll make it up to him. Sounded true when I said it. It still does. But right after the surgery, something else took over relief. Pride. A kind of hunger to feel normal again. The reconstruction went well. No complications. No scary phone calls. When I finally took the bandages off and stood in front of the bathroom mirror, I didn't cry. That was new. I put on a bra slow, careful. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was putting on a costume over a wound. I started caring again. Hair done. A little makeup. Matching workout sets. I used to roll my eyes at. It wasn't about being flashy. It was about feeling like a woman instead of a patient. Dan noticed. One evening, he looked up from the table and said, "You seem lighter." I smiled and thought, I'm getting my life back. And without realizing it, I stopped thinking in we. Once I started thinking my life, the distance didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breathing. I stayed at the gym longer for my health. 10 more minutes turned into 40. I'd stop at the grocery store after, wandering aisles I didn't need, just to delay going home to the quiet heaviness of illness. A few times, I walked in and found Dan had already eaten, a plate in the sink, the TV on low. He'd look at me like he didn't want to complain, but didn't know how not to. I started answering texts quickly and putting my phone away like I was being polite. Like the phone was the problem, not what it represented. One night Dan asked, gentle, everything okay? And I heard the real question underneath it. Are we okay? I didn't want that conversation, not after everything he'd done. So I gave him my first small lie, wrapped in a tired voice. Just tired. And he nodded, like he believed me. After I said just tired, I started saying it a lot. It became my easy answer, my shield. Around that time, Dan's energy changed. It wasn't dramatic. No ambulance, no collapse. He just looked worn down in a way that didn't bounce back after sleep. More lab appointments, more calls, more envelopes from the clinic. I forced myself to go with him to one visit. Like showing up once could balance the scales. The doctor talked numbers, kidney function, sodium, fluid limits. We'll keep monitoring. He explained it calmly, like this was manageable, like it wouldn't swallow our calendar. I nodded at the right moments, but my mind went blank. All I could hear was the same thing over and over. We're going back. Back to waiting rooms. Back to bad news. back to life being measured in appointments and side effects. On the drive home, I turned the music up too loud, not because I wanted to sing, because I didn't want to think. The monitoring didn't last long. One day it was diet changes. The next day it was dialysis. The first time I walked into the center with Dan, I felt my stomach drop. Rows of recliner chairs, daytime TV playing too loudly, a sharp, clean smell that clung to your clothes, people sitting there with blankets like it was a second job. Dan tried to make it lighter. He pointed at the chair and said, "At least it reclines." He even smiled, like he was doing it for me. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. Afterward, he came home and went straight to the couch. Not the bed, the couch. He fell asleep with his shoes still on, one arm hanging off the side like his body gave up before his pride could argue. I stood in the kitchen staring at his pill bottles, lined up by the coffee maker, and for the first time, I could see it clearly. Our normal life wasn't coming back. When I realized our normal life wasn't coming back, I didn't become stronger. I became slippery. At the gym, I'd add just 20 more minutes. Not because I needed it, because I needed a place where no one looked at me like I was part of an emergency. Then I'd invent little errands, swing by CVS, pick up one thing at Target, return a package I could have returned any day. Some afternoons I didn't even go inside, anywhere. I'd pull into a Starbucks parking lot, get a drink I didn't need, and sit there with the engine off. Quiet, air conditioning humming, no pill bottles, no dialysis schedule. My phone would buzz. "Dan, when are you coming home?" I'd stare at the message like it was a demand instead of a husband asking for his wife. I'd type one word soon and hit send. Then I'd lock the screen fast, like that single lie could keep my guilt from leaking out. Soon became my default, and in that space I was creating between his need and my avoidance, something slipped in. It was a message from a guy at the gym. Nothing dirty, nothing obvious. "You crushed it today." I remember holding my phone with my thumb hovering, reading it twice. Then a third time, like I was trying to figure out why it made my chest feel warm. I told myself, it's harmless. I told myself, I'm allowed to have a life. I told myself a lot of things, and then I replied, 2 seconds. That's all it took. A quick thanks with a smiley face I wouldn't have used if Dan were watching. Right after, I walked into the house and heard Dan in the kitchen. Voice tired but normal. "Hey, what are we doing for dinner?" I said, "I don't know," too fast. And I felt it the first thin line I'd crossed before I even admitted it was a line. That first reply should have died in the thread like a bad idea. It didn't. It stretched. How was your day?" turned into jokes about the gym playlist. A quick comment about my form turned into, "You've got discipline?" The messages weren't graphic. That's what made them dangerous, because they felt reasonable, easy, clean. I started catching myself smiling at my phone like a teenager, then feeling stupid for it. I'd read a text twice before answering, like the right response mattered. One evening I was on the couch, thumb scrolling, and Dan walked in from the hallway. Instinct. Pure instinct. I flipped my phone face down on my thigh. Dan's eyes landed on it, not accusing, just noticing. "Who's that?" My heart kicked once. Hard. I didn't even think. I just said it. Too quick. "Just a friend from class." And Dan nodded, like he didn't want to make a thing out of it, which somehow made it worse. After that, Dan started needing me more. Not in a dramatic way, just in a slow, humiliating way. He couldn't drive himself some days after dialysis. He'd stand by the door with his keys, hesitate, then set them down like it hurt his pride. So I drove him. I sat in those waiting rooms. I smiled at nurses. I did the good wife stuff. But inside, I felt tight, irritated, like his illness was taking up all the air in our house. One night, after we got home, and he shuffled to the couch, Dan looked at me for a long time. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He just asked, quietly, "Do you still want us?" That question landed like a weight, because it wasn't about sex. It wasn't about a bad week. It was about whether I was still here. And I could have told the truth about fear, about numbness, about how I was slipping. Instead I snapped, "Don't start. I'm exhausted." Dan's face changed. Not angry, just shut down. He turned away, and the silence that followed felt like a door closing. After Dan turned away that night, I told myself I deserved a break from feeling like the bad guy in my own house. That's how I justified what came next. The guy from the gym texted. Coffee after class. I answered fast. Sure, just to talk. I picked a drive-through place right off the highway. Busy enough to feel anonymous. Loud enough that nothing had to get deep. I kept my sunglasses on even though it was cloudy. I ordered something sweet I didn't need. Hands steady while my stomach wasn't. We talked about harmless things, music, workouts, his job. He laughed at my jokes like they were new. Like I was new. When I got back in my car, I folded the receipt small and shoved it under the console. Then I opened my calendar and deleted the block of time like it never happened. At home, Dan was on the couch. I leaned down, kissed him quick, more like a tap than a kiss, and said, "Hey, babe." He smiled anyway. That smile made me feel colder. I told myself coffee was nothing, but nothing has a way of asking for more. After class, a few days later, we stood by our cars in the parking lot. Windy, shopping carts clinking in the distance. Normal, that's what made it feel safe. He stepped closer and touched my hand, just a light brush, like he was checking if I'd pull away. I didn't, and in that second, I felt two things at once: seen and ashamed. Seen, because he looked at me like I wasn't a patient, or a caregiver, or a problem to manage, just a woman. Ashamed because I knew exactly what I was doing. I drove home with the radio off, gripping the steering wheel too tight. When I walked in, Dan lifted his head. His voice was calm, almost casual. "Where were you?" I didn't even hesitate. I hated how easy it was. "Errands," I said, and he nodded like he was trying to believe me. The scary part wasn't that I lied, it was that it barely hurt anymore. After errands, lying started to feel like a habit. I didn't even notice I was building. The first thing that changed wasn't my schedule, it was my phone. I began setting it face down without thinking on the counter, on my thigh, on the nightstand. Like the screen itself was guilty. I started taking it into the bathroom with me, even for a 2-minute shower, even when there was no reason. I'd say I was listening to music. I wasn't. Dan noticed, because Dan notices everything when he's quiet. One evening he was sitting on the couch, pale and drained, and he watched me tuck my phone under a towel like I was hiding it from air. He didn't accuse. He didn't raise his voice. He just asked, softly, "Are you hiding something?" My throat went tight. My face stayed calm. And instead of telling the truth, I did the ugliest thing. Something I used to judge other women for. I gave a little laugh and said, "You're paranoid." The look on his face wasn't anger. It was hurt and doubt, and I let him sit in that. Once Dan started doubting himself, it got easier for me to keep moving. Not better. Easier. A second guy came into the picture through a friend from the gym. Someone who'd show up to group workouts and talk like he knew everyone. He'd clap when I finished a set, grin and say, "You're strong," or honestly, "You're inspiring." The kind of words that land different when you've spent years being looked at. Like you're fragile. When the group planned a happy hour, I said yes before I could think. I told myself it was harmless because it was a group thing. In my car, parked 2 rows away, I changed my shirt, swapped the oversized hoodie for something fitted, ran lip balm across my mouth like it mattered. Halfway through my first drink, my phone buzzed Dan's name. I watched it vibrate on the table, and I didn't pick up. I told myself I'd call back in a minute, but I didn't, and that was heavier than any text I'd ever sent. After I missed Dan's call at happy hour, I told myself it was a one-time thing. But the lie didn't stay small. It grew legs. The third guy wasn't the gym flirt. He was the one who sent long messages, the kind that made you feel like someone was sitting across from you, actually listening. He'd write, "How's Dan today?" And I'd answer with details I should have been sharing at home labs. Fatigue. The way dialysis stole his color. He'd respond with sympathy that felt clean and effortless. That's a lot. "You've been carrying so much," and my chest would loosen, like I'd finally exhaled. That's when I started deleting texts right after reading them. Not because I forgot, because I remembered that night. Dan stood in front of me in the kitchen, blocking my path to the hallway. His voice was quiet, almost flat. I feel alone. I stared past his shoulder, like there was an exit behind him, and I said nothing. Dan's "I feel alone" followed me for days. I carried it through the grocery store, through the gym, through the parking lot, like a bruise you keep touching to see if it still hurts. One evening I texted the first guy and said I needed to talk. Just talk. That phrase made me feel like I wasn't doing something wrong. Yet. We met behind a strip mall near the highway. Bright lights, empty spaces, the sound of cars rushing past. He asked if I wanted to sit inside because it was cold. I got into his car. The door closed, and suddenly it felt like the world had been muted. We talked for a minute, maybe 2. Then he reached for me and kissed me. I froze 1 second long enough to know exactly what line I was standing on. Then I kissed him back. When I got home, Dan was asleep on the couch. I went straight to the bathroom and brushed my teeth for way too long. Like mint could scrub off what I'd chosen after that kiss. I didn't suddenly turn into a different person. I just started managing my life like a liar. I built a fake schedule that sounded normal. Gym, errands, a late meeting, grabbing something quick. Nothing dramatic, just enough to buy time. I kept my phone on silent the second I walked in the door, like I was protecting my peace when really I was protecting my secrets. When Dan asked basic questions, "What took so long? Did you pick up the meds?" I'd get snappy, like he was the problem for noticing, like his questions were accusations. And Dan started paying attention in a way I hadn't seen before. He didn't argue. He didn't chase me around the house. He just started remembering times, small details, how long Target actually takes, how often someone needs one more errand. Sometimes he'd look at me for a long time and say nothing. That silence was heavier than yelling, because it felt like he was putting pieces together and I couldn't stop him. Dan's worst day came on a random weekday, like life always does. No warning, no build-up, just one call that should have snapped me back to reality. He had a bad dialysis session. His blood pressure dropped, and he got so wiped out he could barely stand. He texted me from the center, "Can you pick me up early? I don't feel right." I was sitting across from someone else, pretending I was just talking. My phone buzzed on the table, and Dan's name lit up the screen like a flare. I stared at it. My stomach turned. For a second, I almost got up. Almost. Then I typed the worst sentence I've ever sent to my husband. "I can't right now." I hit send, and my hands went cold. Later I found out he sat there alone, waiting until a nurse helped him call an Uber. He came home gray-faced, moving slow, trying not to show how much it hurt, and I acted like I didn't know why. After I left Dan to get home from dialysis alone, the house changed. Not louder, quieter, like something inside him had gone cold. A few nights later, we were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, the TV on, but nobody watching. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. Just one quick vibration, but the screen lit up bright, obvious, and a notification flashed long enough for Dan to see a name that wasn't his. He didn't explode. He didn't swear. He just turned his head and asked, very calmly, "Who is that?" My body reacted before my brain did. I snatched the phone like it was hot. Dan held his hand out, slow, like he was giving me a chance. "Let me see," I heard myself say, sharp and childish. "No." There was a pause, thick, painful. Dan's eyes stayed on me, steady. Then he nodded once and said, almost to himself, "So it's real." And in that moment, I knew the story in my head was over. I thought, "So it's real," was the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part was what he did next. He got organized, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, terrifying way. A day later, I walked into the kitchen and saw everything laid out on the table, like he was setting a place for the truth. A crumpled coffee receipt, a printed screenshot of my location history, gaps in my calendar where I deleted blocks of time, a few notes on scrap paper with dates and hours. Dan sat there with his shoulders slumped, looking older than he was. He didn't accuse. He asked questions. On Tuesday, You said Target. Why were you near the highway? Thursday. Why did you turn your phone off? Who were you with after class? I tried to deny it at first. Half-truths. It's not what you think. You're twisting it. Then my voice ran out. Dan looked me dead in the face and asked the only question that mattered. How many, hung in the air like smoke. I could have kept lying. I could have fought for the story I'd been telling myself. But Dan had receipts on the table and exhaustion in his eyes. And suddenly my excuses sounded cheap even in my own head. So I said the first name, the first guy, the one from the gym. My voice came out flat, like it belonged to someone else. Dan didn't cry. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He just leaned back in the chair and let out this slow breath, like his body was trying to survive what his heart just heard. Then he looked at me and asked, quiet and precise, when I was on the chair, not when I got sick, not during dialysis season, when I was on the chair. I nodded once. I couldn't even form the words. Dan stared at the pill bottles by the coffee maker, then back at me. I trusted you with my life, he said, and that's when it finally hit. This wasn't about betrayal. This was about survival. After he said I trusted you with my life, the kitchen felt smaller, like the walls were listening. Dan didn't raise his voice. He didn't call me names. That almost would have been easier. Instead he asked, is there more? I tried to shake my head. My mouth even started to form no. But the truth was already cracked open, and I knew if I lied again, I'd be doing it to his face after everything on that table. So I told him about the second guy, a friend of a friend. The happy hour? Dan's hand started to tremble on the edge of the table. He pressed his palm down hard, like he could stop it. He swallowed, blinked slow, and said, okay, like he was taking a hit and staying upright. Then his eyes lifted, and the name I saw on your phone. That's him too. I whispered, no, that's when I said there was a third, not just physical, emotional. Messages, late-night comfort. Dan stood up like his legs forgot how to hold him. He grabbed the counter with one hand and leaned there, breathing through his nose quiet, shaking, trying not to fall apart in front of me. After I said third, the fight didn't happen, not the movie version. Anyway, Dan didn't throw anything. He didn't storm out. We just kept sitting there. It was past midnight. The dishwasher was running, that steady rinse and drain sound filling the gaps where we should have had words. The kitchen light made everything look tired. Our faces, the mail pile, the pill bottles by the coffee maker. I started crying. Not pretty, not quiet. I covered my mouth like that could hide it, and I said the first thing that felt true, even if it sounded pathetic. I was lonely. Dan stared at the table, like he was reading that sentence off the wood grain. Then he said, calm and brutal, I was dying. That hit harder than yelling. I tried to reach for something hopeful. I can try, I said, but my voice sounded empty, like even I didn't believe it. Dan finally looked at me. I need safety, he said, not promises. And I knew right then. He wasn't asking any more. He was deciding. The next morning wasn't dramatic. That's what people don't understand. The worst endings are quiet. I packed a bag in our bedroom like I was going on a normal trip. A couple workout sets, jeans, toiletries. I grabbed my phone charger, my ID, a folder with papers. I didn't even look at, just shoved it in. Because my hands needed something to do. Dan stayed at the kitchen table, a stack of mail in front of him. His meds lined up like always. He looked smaller in that chair. Not because he was weak, because he didn't have any fight left to waste. I walked past him, and he didn't stop me. He didn't beg. He didn't threaten. He just said, low, like he was talking to himself more than to me. I really believed you'd be here. I stood at the door with my hand on the knob, my throat closed, my eyes burned. And then I did the most ordinary, unforgivable thing. I opened the door and stepped out. I became the person I used to judge, the wife I swore I'd never be. And I'm not saying that to shock you. I'm saying it because it's the only honest ending. Cheating wasn't the beginning. It was the symptom The beginning was the moment I started checking out and calling it stress. The moment I chose silence over a hard conversation. The moment I went looking for significance, feeling seen, feeling wanted. Outside the life that actually needed my courage. Here's what I learned the ugly way. Love isn't proven when you're healthy and proud. It's proven when you're tired, scared, and life is inconvenient. Survival changes people, but it also reveals them. And if you don't name what you're feeling, early fear, resentment, loneliness, it will leak out sideways as secrets. Caregiving needs support, not martyrdom. Marriage needs truth, not fine. And loyalty isn't a vibe. It's a choice you make on the ordinary days before the worst day arrives. All right, let May be painfully clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and it showed up fast. A stranger asked you something stupid at a bar, you said no, and Mark turned you from wife to suspect. That's red flag number 1, suspicion, without proof. Then he started the classic toxic combo, moving the goalpost, demanding the truth after you already gave it, and treating your calm as evidence. That's not concern. That's control wearing a suit. And when someone blocks the exit, when your "I need air" becomes "Why are you running?" that's not love. That's a power test. The moment he rewrote the story, you pushed me, you escalated. That's gaslighting 1. Oh, 1. Not loud, not messy, just cold, tidy cruelty. So here's your takeaway straight up. Your no is a full sentence. You don't audition for basic respect. You don't negotiate reality with someone who benefits from you doubting yourself. If you're hearing this and your stomach drops, trust that. Red flags don't get greener with time. To the villain of this story, karma doesn't need your permission. It just keeps receipts. And to you, sweetheart, this debt, May clears it. But remember, these eyes are always watching. Don't let your name end up on May's blacklist next episode. Hit subscribe, because around here, justice doesn't show up late. It shows up ready. A final note from the library. While these stories find their roots in the halls of Reddit, they are artistically reimagined to speak to the heart. Any likeness to reality is mere coincidence. The emotions, however, are very real. Walk with empathy and let justice lead the way. Thank you for watching.